tonight's speakers, Greg Moss and Luke Schmidt, my reading what I gave. They got infected in October 2004 by scales and balances that were made in Michigan that resulted in a large documentarian and various publications. Part of their work can be found at the Burton Collection. Both are members of ISASC, the International Society of Antique Scale Collectors, with about 450 members worldwide. So they have a captive audience. Are any of you members of the ISASC? Me neither. Okay. Greg, who is nicknamed Walter Stimpson, is still working in corporate human resource development, and he got interested in scales when he received a present of a price computing scale made by the Standard Computing Scale Company of Detroit. And Ut started his broad collection and library of scales and dairy items about 36 years ago when he was still living in Germany. TRW seatbelt activities brought him to America 26 years ago, and he's meanwhile American, but he sticks to the saying, you can always tell a German, but you can't tell him much. He said it, not me. And now I present our speakers.
Okay. Welcome. We are glad you are here but I thought someone would be here at least because shopping interests everyone. And thanks for coming. Was anyone at Myers recently in the fast lane? Okay. So you know there's a scanner and a scale at the beginning, and then you put your stuff in the bag, and there's a second scale which controls what you put in there. So no cheating there. And at the end, you get automatically your, after you put your credit card in naturally, you get your receipt and then up you go. Today we are 120 years back. We are in Cuttings General Store, the time 21st of September in 1882.
1882? I should talk about 1882 because I was about 12 years old at that time, and I can remember my mother just taking me into the store, and you know, everything was behind the counter and anything, and they always waited on everybody, and they were always using these scales and so on. And actually, I grew up in Milan, just south of Ann Arbor. There, I was born there in the family farm. So, you saying something? What did you say?
You have to be in back of the counter.
I have to be in back of the counter.
Yeah.
Ah.
Otherwise, you throw the whole thing.
There we go. There's everything. So it was a major problem at that time of grocery shopping because almost everything was in commodities and always had to be weighed, but people didn't buy things by the way that we do them now. We don't go in, at that time, now we go in and we say, I want 2 pounds of hamburger or whatever that may be. At that time, watch movies. They went in and said, I want 2 bits of this, I want 10 cents of that. And so they bought things by value, not by weight. And so that really created a problem. And so what I want to do here is show you, this is a typical old little grocery store scale about the later 1800s, 1892. I can remember my mother using this kind of scale for that. And to show you how this works, we need a shopper. Let's see, there's a picture.
I have to get ready for shopping, to put my scarf around. And shopping is one of my favorite things. I spend about 40% of the family's income just for food. So I'm important in the family. And then some of the storekeepers, they try to cheat. They put their finger on. I do it also. But for me it's good. But they don't do this with me. So yeah, I think I go shopping.
Well, hi, Mary.
Oh, hi. Nice to meet you.
What would you like?
Oh, for 6 cents sugar, please.
Oh, 6 cents?
6 cents, no more.
Well, no problem, because we have sugar here, and it's 10 cents a pound, right? And you want 6 cents worth, and how am I going to figure that out? Because my scale here only goes in half ounces. Well, see, I was a math teacher. Was anybody in one of my math classes? Who did I recognize? Where's Judy? I thought I recognized. There's Judy over there. You are really pretty good. If you keep at this, you might even grow up to be a principal or something like that, Judy. So, but you were up there in that front row, right? And so here was the math question of the moment. Okay, so Mary, oh, this is my flip chart holder too. Mary wants, for my sugar is 10 cents for 16 ounces, and Mary wants 6 cents worth, and so how much do I have to give her? Quickly.
I don't have all day. I have places to go. People to see.
All right. I have to give Mary 9.6 ounces on this thing. Thank you, Mrs. Flipchart. Okay, we can set that. Now let's see what we can do with that, because my scale only goes to half ounces, and therefore, if I go to 9.5 ounces, it's not going to be good. She's going to be angry, and therefore I'm going to have to give her a little bit more, right? So, but let's see how this thing works. Let's see, we have some sugar here. We have that over there. Okay, I'm just gonna set this for 9.5 ounces. Okay, and we get your hand off of that, Mary. Mary, calmly, Mary. I'm going as fast as I can. Let's see. Would you? Okay, that's a constant problem with the customers putting their finger on the scales and trying to make things go the other way for them.
You have to look out for me.
Okay. Well, all right. That's pretty good. How is that for you, Mary?
That is great. I always like a little bit more.
Wow. Oh, wow. Thank you very much for shopping with us today.
Thank you.
Boy. And Mary, of course, is getting...
Next time a little bit more, please.
Yeah, she gets impatient and everything else. And, one of these days she's even going to start voting or something. I don't know. But you see, I just gave away a little bit extra sugar. And if I pour a little bit more in, I'm going to give away a little bit more. And by the way, I'm going to do this over and over and over again all day long. Am I going to do this 100 times in a day? Because one shopper may buy several items that I weigh. So if I lose a penny on each sale for 100 sales in a day, that's $1. You know how much my store clerk makes? $1 a day, right? So I'm giving away $1. So we figured there's got to be a better way. So I go away, and then I come back, and I'm off teaching. I walk back into the local grocery store, and here's Grocer Schmidt in the grocery store, and all these people huddled around this fantastic gadget going, ooh and ah.
Look at this beautiful fancy thing. I'm in pig heaven. You can move all those things around, and then you have weights, and they say even dollars on it.
Don't break it.
Yeah.
I hope not. And I hope one day I understand how to use it.
That is a beautiful, and it tells you the price and everything.
Yeah,
you don't have to go through this old scale stuff.
No.
And you just make it balance.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So, of course, I'd head off, go back to school, and I come back in, and there is storekeeper Schmidt,
Yeah.
and his scale is gone.
Where
did your scale go?
This piece of junk, I really didn't like it. I gave it back to the merchant, to the salesperson. He just cheated me out of my money. I couldn't use it. I can slaughter a pig, but this was too much for me.
Well, that really bothered me. So I went on home, down to the farm, and I took out a piece of brass, and I started taking a look at that, and I used some of my math stuff, and I started putting some stuff on a piece of brass, and then says, I wonder if this thing might be easier to use. A way to, in one operation, instead of all those different beams up there and try to figure everything out, and just in one operation, figure out the price or value or whatever. When it balances. Take all of this arithmetic and all this fussing around, take that complete out of there. So I made one of these things up and got a couple of partners together. In fact, one of the guys who encouraged me was a guy named Mel Barnes. He was the cashier of the local bank. And so they encouraged me, but they said, Walter, you need to go out and get some sales and don't come back. This is during the summer, right? Don't come back until you have at least about a half a dozen sales. Well, there's no way I'm going to do this in Milan because I'm going to get too embarrassed, right? So I go up next village up to Manchester and walk into the store with my samples of the scale over here. and find a storekeeper in the local grocery store. And say, you look familiar. You look like Mr. Schmidt.
Oh, that's my twin.
Your twin? Oh, your twin brother. Wow. I thought I was going to. Well, I would like to show you what I have here just to help
Just
out
go
your
ahead,
store.
go ahead. I'm all for it.
Yes, so I made this beautiful machine for you here, and I made this up in here. And all you have to do to tell the price, see it's on two sides, so you can see it. And the prices are on here, and we just slide this down to the price and value. You follow the curve up. You just set it once, and when you put the right weight on here, it balances, and you're all done. Isn't that neat?
That is neat.
Yeah.
You know, I want one. I order one.
Excellent.
Yeah, just
Excellent.
make it two, because my
Two.
twin wants also one.
Your twin?
I'm sure he wants.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
Oh, you're
I
welcome.
appreciate that. And went back to my partners. I had 7 orders in hand. They were just as happy as he was with his other scale. As a pig was. Well, anyway. So we started our business there in Milan, and in fact, as soon as we got going, we needed a place to make more scales, so we went up to Tecumseh and actually formed the Stimpson Computing Scale Company, my name on it, with my patent on it, and started building these things in Tecumseh. So it seems like then, oh yes, we now have to meet at the church. I'll see you there.
This is the oldest scale which we ever had in Michigan. It's quite an all-purpose scale, and it's accurate within an eighth of an ounce from 1 ounce to 850 pounds. Way ahead of its time. Where's Mr. Potter? Where's Mr. Potter? You wanted to talk? Yeah, you know, he's still asleep. He dreams.
Something else, because I had a trivia question for you. Do you know who the Secretary-Treasurer of the Michigan Scale Company was?
How would I know?
It was a man named Harry Potter. And I predict it may take 100 years, but you will hear from him again.
Michigan had all the makings to be an industrial powerhouse. First of all, we had the rich resources in the north, and one day accessible through the sewer locks. Cities grew rapidly, needed food. The farmers wanted to sell their products, and the storekeepers asked for the price. Michigan scale companies supplied the needs. Stimpson, Standard, Barnes, and Kale. We found 118 inventors just for scales in Michigan, most of them in Detroit. One even came from Royal Oak next door. And they had altogether 228 patents, and good ones. This picture could be in any living room. It's a grain scale showing. And here are some of the typical patents. There's a swivel base, so you could turn to the customer the scale around so he could see what was going on. And then the weight collecting system was a real novelty, because now the store owner couldn't really file away or add a little bit, so he would make more profit. In those days, the Detroit River was the greatest commercial artery in the world. 2.25 million train cars could have transported the same load. And if you compare New York, they had just 30% of the tonnage, and London, England, mere 27%. So that's how big it was.
And here is a close-up of my patent of that beautiful beam that I put together up there. And so I did this one in 1894. I actually had a patent for a farm piece just before that, but this was my first scale patent up here. And then you can also see we published it with instructions of how it worked. You slide it along and you can read what you need up there. So, and I mentioned over when we were in the store that we moved up to Tecumseh, and in fact went national. Here, in fact, here's an ad from a national magazine for 2 of my Stimpson scales right here, made in Tecumseh. So this leads to a question, because you saw the storekeeper over there struggling with this Dayton scale. And then if you go to this thing called a website. I don't know what that is. But if you go to something like that, they keep saying that, well, this was the first computing scale company. And my question is, since I was a teacher, I get the question, is this true or false? False. False. In fact, Petrick had the first really significant computing scale company, a guy out of Ohio, followed by his patents came up to Detroit, and the Detroit Computing Scale Company was formed. Yeah, that didn't make it, and that went broke, and two guys came up from Ohio, bought it, opened it up, and eventually changed the name to the Dayton Scale Company. They weren't number one, they were number three, and it passed right through here. Part of this, Petrick, this is how valuable this stuff was. In that point of time, part of the deal was $1 million warranty deed for 4,000 watts, $250 a piece in the Detroit area. And it became part of the Jerome Park subdivision. You can see that line going up there. It's right close to the railroad tracks, good transportation and so on. And in fact, there was this futurist drawer out there that created this. I don't know what this thing called I-75, that line that's in there, but I do know there is Jerome Park on Wall Street, and these people are still involved with that thing right there. Somewhere in the future, it still exists.
Yeah, that's me, Thomas Comerford. I'm the president of the Standard Computing Scale Company. And I like fishing, but the big fish I fry in business. And look at my beautiful magnifying glasses. My people at the optical company made it for me. I like to tell you about my company. It all started with Francis Osborne, one of those New Yorkers. Smart guy, graduated with honors. And then he started tinkering around with cash registers, and one day he came up with this beautiful scale there. Now we could compete against Mr. Stimpson and those guys in Dayton. But already after a year, he left me and went on other ventures of his own. Look at this scale. You could predetermine how much cheese to cut off. It's a little bit fancier than the mousetrap we saw over there. Mr. Osborne came by with this idea, like he does sometimes, but you know, I couldn't rely on him. I hired a German genius, Mr. Jenichen. And look what he invented for me. A quite handy, nice scale.
So we're talking in the early 1900s here. And, well, somebody in here knows something about history. So here's the question. In 1904, you have three choices. Which of these companies was the largest one in Detroit? Was it the Detroit Oldsmobile Company? Was it happened to be the Kale Brothers, or was it the Stroh Brewery? So who thinks it was the Detroit Oldsmobile Company? We have one. How about the Kale Brothers? Wherever they might be. Oh, there's a few. How about Stroh?
Yes.
And the answer is, it was the Kale Brothers. They were twice the size of Stroh Brewery. And remember, Oldsmobile was really in Lansing. They only had a handful of people in Detroit. That's why that number is so low.
You know, Arthur and Adolf knew how to get at your coins. They invented slot machines, coin-operated machines. So you put your nickel in, and then you got your fortune, possibly even. And then they had boat motors also. It was the biggest company of its kind in those days. And look at their scale in the storefront. And just one coin at a time. They even had in Paris, France, an office. And then one day, Debris approached them in order to build a car, a prototype. And they had the boat motor. So that was a beautiful fit. Unfortunately, this was the only one they ever built. By the way, I forgot before, Arthur commissioned quite a few nice motor and sailing yards. And he had quite a good excuse. He tested the motors. And here are great news, because 1912, the factory was expanded. And you know, that's a city block. It was quite a factory. And then they started to make 6-cylinder engines for cars. And they even invented and made a jitney box for fare collection in those buses there. And this is their plant for the scales just a few steps away from the Fisher building. And you can rent an apartment there if you want. And we even found the family. There's Arthur, the grandson, and Judy, the great-granddaughter.
And so when we talked with Arthur in June at age, what, Judy? Judy's
92.
He was 92 at the time. And we talked for over a couple of hours. And here's just a little segment. He was talking about his grandfather, what his grandfather was like, and then he described something that they made these slot machines, and he described something that his grandfather actually invented, which was to make the slot machine always appear that the jackpot was full so that people would play those more often.
He was just a mechanic, you know what I mean? A great mechanic. I remember when he put the slots together, he'd tell them what to do, and they'd solder the parts on the prototypes, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes I helped him do it. He'd solder the parts to the slot machine. He was just clever like that, you know? He knew how to get the coins going and stuff like that, and move them down through the tubes. And I'll tell you one of the greatest in history. If you ever played the slot machines years ago, people would not play them until the jackpot was full. The jackpot had to be full. So my grandfather made a slot machine. I think I got a picture of it too. Made a slot machine that he soldered whatever he did, the coins right in a thing. And then what would happen, that thing would turn around when it'd win, and the coins would come out of the tube in the back, and the next pull it would be full. It'd pull it back up.
It always.
So I'm going to say a very inventive man.
And you know, I think Judy, his great-granddaughter, wants to show us a few things she has from her great-grandfather. Judy, if you don't mind.
A couple things.
You want to come up front here, then we can all see it.
He was born in Detroit and then began his business in Saginaw and then came back to Detroit, I think because of the fabricating plants and the other kinds of businesses over here. But he belonged to the Elks. So we have his Elks tooth, which is kind of unique, and then the pocket watch that he had that came with it, and then this is a plated membership card that was all engraved from being a member of the Elks and in Detroit, and he was a life member. So that was one of the treasures that we have.
Oh.
And as this came up, I thought of one other thing that you and I haven't talked, or maybe talked about briefly. He invented and manufactured scales. And then, interestingly enough, my father, who is still alive, but unfortunately not in good enough health to come tonight, at one point in his life sold scales, but a different type, not his grandfather's. He sold very large scales that they used in industry to weigh industrial parts. It was called Hydromatic Scale Company. He was manufacturer's rep for that. So it was just kind of interesting that his grandfather manufactured scales, your lectures about scales, and then my father, probably during the 50s, sold scales to a lot of the General Motors facilities. So.
Thanks for sharing this with us.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Judy.
So we're still in this era of the first decade of the 1900s, and there are these major changes going on in the industry at this time. One of them is this formation of the Computing Scale Company of America. And the Sherman Antitrust Act was actually passed several years earlier, but by about 1900, they had kind of stopped much of the enforcement of it. And so people started to form trusts again, which actually were trying to get a monopoly. That's what they were trying to do. And so what happened is the W.F. Stimpson Company, one of my scale companies, went together with that Dayton Company and formed a single trust called the Computing Scale Company of America. And so they operated together under that and shared patents and shared distribution and manufacturing eventually. And then there was new competition coming in at that same era, that same set of 10 years. And besides that, scale companies in the U.S. were starting to go international. So here's my family tree. my brother George, my brother Frederick, and myself, Walter. And you can see that we were born in the Milan and grew up in that area there. And they all got involved in the scale business. We'll come back to George later on, but Frederick came in as part of the Stimpson WF and Company. Now, you need to keep score because I had a lot of companies, so I want to see who gets it right. Okay, so we started out in Milan, we went to Tecumseh, that was a different one. We moved again, we moved to Detroit. I have this one over here. You've seen a couple of other names. So if you get close, you're doing well. Right? So this leads to a question of a guy named George Payne. Who was George Payne? Well, here's your question, multiple choice. Was he the first president of the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company? Did he organize the Consolidated Rubber Tire Company? Was he president of the W.F. Stimpson Company? Was he organizer and secretary of a large bank, which was the National Investment Loan Company, or maybe all of these? What do you think? Somebody's catching on here. Yes. And besides him, I was able to recruit two other major players in the Detroit industry market. Sherman Miller was an industrialist. John Leggett was a lawyer. I formed with the W.F. Stimpson Company a very, very high-powered company at that time. And I would just take this sort of secondary role, let these guys do their thing. So what we did is made computing scales. And this one here happens to live in a safe little box someplace with the Detroit Historical Museum. But beautiful. This is a computing scale, not just hanging. You can see the front and back of it here. So you can tell the price on a hanging scale. And then, of course, I was still making my great old scale. Well, what was happening at that time is these companies had gone from Tecumseh. It also then went to Elkhart, Indiana. And in Elkhart, Indiana, we had an agreement. That was okay. The agreement said that if I write you a letter and 6 months, to give you 6 months notice, we can stop using your patents and name and we'll stop paying you money. It's what that amounted to. So this guy, remember Mel Barnes? He was the secretary and he's the one who actually signed that letter to me to say, okay, we don't need you anymore. So, of course, what I did is started making computing scales in Detroit because they told me I could use my own patents, and so that's what I did. But here's the problem. Here's the scale made at the same time in Elkhart. Does it look maybe a little bit similar? Like maybe they were still using my patents? Does it something have a name on it like Stimpson Computing Scale Company of Elkhart? So me and my three new very powerful partners in this thing, I think that's why we all got together, we sued. And we won that lawsuit because of patent violations and use of name and those kinds of things in there. And actually that basically made that company of very low value, and we ended up buying it. So we took it from Elkhart and landed it back in Detroit, and they had the good name because it was the name that had been established, the Stimpson Computing Scale Company. And so we took that name as the sales arm and used the W.F. Stimpson Company, you keep track of the company, the W.F. Stimpson Company to do the manufacturing, right? And then, as I did in many places, I sell licenses for my patents, I sell property for my name, and I go do something else, right? And so I went back to Milan. And while I was in Milan, I started another scale company. I didn't know what else to do. I just couldn't make computing scales there. And you can see the touch that we had. Like there's this gal from Milan who went to visit her boyfriend in Detroit. He happened to work for the Stimpson Company in Detroit. And well, they went over to Windsor, and when they came back, they were married. Of course, 50 years later, they were still married. You can see over there that the Peppers had this nice anniversary. And by the way, Milan didn't have enough hotel space. The train came through there. So I built a hotel called the Stimpson Hotel, of course. And in the meantime, I got married to Estelle. She's out of Cleveland, or out of Toledo, I'm sorry. But the hotel even became known by Henry Ford. He loved to stop in, years later after I kind of was out of the area. And he'd stop in, he just raved about the apple pie at the Stimpson Hotel in Milan. So what did I do? Well, I would start making parts and pieces for things, sometimes under the Stimpson name, but I would also start to sell them. So I might do something like this. This might have been sold, for example, by Sears. And I can show you an example here. this is how we did it. See, like, here's the instructions on how to put together one of those scales. And if you read all of these instructions, it gets all down to the bottom, and there's no manufacturer on it. It just simply says that this was printed in Detroit. However, when I look at this, I know it's one of my scales because these wheels, those little wheels, I've got a patent for that. Okay, so this happens to be one of my scales here. And besides that, if you really look closely, I took one of them apart one day and came up with this piece. And if you look real closely out here, it'll say Stimpson out here. It does say Stimpson out there. So this is from that large type of scale that could have been sold anywhere under various kinds of names. So that was the primary business. Make this stuff, sell it through all different kinds of outlets. In fact, this happens to be a scale also. It looks like a wheelbarrow, but when you lay it down and it's flat, this was made in Detroit. The American Herald Company is a Detroit company. And it had a Stimpson scale in it. You open it up and it would weigh up to 600 pounds on that flat surface when that thing was tipped back. And another type of scale, hanging up on a beam, from the Stimpson Standard Scale Company. That was out of Milan then. So this is an idea. This in the newspaper, these little caricatures. It's one of the we plotted out all these different cities around the area that were somewhere manufacturing scales during this kind of era in here, from LaPorte and Elkhart all the way up to Port Huron, but a lot around the Detroit, Kalamazoo, and then of course Toledo and Dayton.
Let's see what the competition did in the meantime. There was Henry Theobald, an ambitious young man. He climbed the ladder all the way to the top of National Cash Register. And one day he upset his boss and found the next morning his furniture on the front lawn. I think they didn't like him there anymore. So he thought, what now? Everyone could put his money in a cigar box, but everyone needed those newfangled scales. And so he looked around, looked for a company and backers, and then he bought the Wilbes in Toledo, and then he fought for market share. Let's see how the government protected us shoppers at the time. At the start of the 20th century, the new generation of scales lacked clear standards and inspection procedures. Rigged scales could not be confiscated. Above all, a prosecutor had to prove that a scale was inaccurate and that a specific customer was knowingly and maliciously cheated. So getting away with it was quite easy. In 1900, the office started with 6 men in 2 rooms in a basement with a workroom, an emptied coal bin under a sidewalk. But already in 1901, the booming industrialization forced Congress to create the full-fledged Bureau of Standards, Weights and Measures. In 1905, there was still chaos when Michigan's deputy state treasurer and inspector reported at the national conference that the newly appointed sealer in Grand Rapids had attempted to make an issue of dishonest merchants, but had soon resigned and was not replaced. He concluded, "I do not think they are very much agitated there over the issue." The social club tried to murder the inspector, the chief inspector for weights and measures, and Johnny, tough as nails, takes over. We see a few scenes which prove the points in our presentation. If you get sound, everyone would be happy.
Johnny is talking to the guy. Okay.
I'm going to make you chief justice. Yes, in my place. I know I can depend on you, John. Thanks, Mr. Lane. Glad you think so. Remember that. Keep your head on your shoulders and your fists in your pockets. Yeah. I'll be sorry. You will have to. It's careful on plenty of
we take all the bites back in. They're not totally over, huh?
Captain, it's just a preliminary. The main object is not someone higher up.
Oh.
Wish I knew.
Oh, the time happens to me. I'll just leave it.
Now remember, Jimmy, don't let that fist drift against anybody's chin.
Oh, don't worry. It won't. You should be able to play that next time I see you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, sir.
Hello? Yeah? You got lunch today, say?
When or noon?
Today, the guy went married. Remember?
Maybe. Maybe. Oh, Johnny Cave, of course. A great guy. He told me so himself.
You went down to him. Same place, 12:30. And don't be late.
What? Me late? Well, I like that. All the nerve. What are you talking about? I'm usually the one that has to stand around waiting 20 minutes for you to show up.
All right. But you heard me. Don't be late. Welcome. I'm just interested in your being right in the hospital. Now, you know, without mentioning any names, who put them there. And why? Because he wouldn't take orders from anybody except the people who trust him. He knew what it meant to keep the house locked. Of course, it doesn't sound like much, cheating just a few ounces of meat on the pound or a few potatoes out of the sack. But understand this, 40% of the American income is spent on food. And if people are cheated out of only 5%, in 1 year, that adds up to more than a water. Now, it's a big job. Big racket to fight. People on the other side of the fence have a great deal at stake, and they want to make it very comfortable. So if there are any of you who are a little bit afraid to tackle it, now's the time to walk. Thanks. That makes it unanimous. Now, here's an easy little gadget, and one of the latest. Here we have a 2-pound weight. Put on the scale. It still weighs 2 pounds. But watch the hand. But very tough on the housewife. And you'd be surprised to name some of the stores who use this little prop foods to advantage. Now, that brings us to a very delicate point. Actually, every time you make a pinch, you're going to be offered a bribe. Now, some former deputies have taken bribes. There's your answer. All right, boys. Now, fellas, homes and barns, things like that, say, huh? You, Morris, one left for you, you man. Show 'em around.
Okay, pal.
And you were late.
That I was. I will not dispute you. I was late. But do you know where I was? I was around to all the newspapers to see if they knew that you were the new chief deputy.
Where are you from?
Well, I was born on the Great Blasket Island off the southwest coast of Ireland. But I lived most of my Bible in a little bit of a village outside of Foxborough, County Mayo.
Not the back of the Goshen Rocks. I think I'm going to take it myself.
You can keep it.
How did you get your name?
Patrick James Abolition Haley.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll just put my wishes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is it. There's a lot of complaints about this place. Oh, I think I'll buy some strawberries. Oh, Johnny, how you buy it? Are they fresh? Fresh. Very thick for a start. Take a box. Yes.
You know, there's a saying in Ireland that it's all right to pick the berries, but you must never cut down the vines, because under the vines live all the good tangles, And if you cut down the vines, you do have that power to do good for it, huh? That's very interesting. But there are no strawberries in Ireland. Oh no, I could swear I saw some of the country. I think I'll buy 5 pounds of sugar. Good morning, sir. Good morning. 5 pounds of sugar, please. Right. How much is that? 28 cents. There you are, your money. Well, wishes? What do you want for supper? Oh, I don't know. Something that would stick to it. I've got an appetite for corned beef. And I've got a reason for chicken. How about a nice human chicken, about 6 pounds? Okay.
There you are, 6 pounds right on the head. Wrap it up. Let me see.
Nothing to that.
The hand just laid it. Get over. What do you like to do? That? Miss Brady. Very cute. Fourth Minnesota spectator at all. Not bad, not bad. What is it, Pleasant?
That course.
How do you suppose those got there?
Your guess is as good as mine. Let me have that sugar. $4 pounds. I paid for 5.
I can't understand that.
We're going to do our best to help you. Go ahead. You haven't missed any bets, have you?
How about buying that bird back for $50?
Oh, you wasted money. He's spoiled by the time he got out of jail. Hold on to that, I'll wish it. That's evidence.
And it'll not leave in my hands.
Yeah, kind of telling the story which we told. Toledo used in their scales a pendulum, which works on gravity, so it always gave you the honest weight. So competition, on the other hand, they use springs, and springs change with heat, with temperature. They are thieves. No wonder that there was such a fight, because 500,000 merchants wanted scales. And it was a market in today's money from 500 million to $1.2 billion. And it grew in leaps and bounces. That's Mary's daughter, 25 cents for a chicken. She had to pay her share for the new scale. And what's this about? In those days, Henry Theobald, a shrewd and innovative businessman, had already begun to orchestrate a national campaign to raise public awareness of the evil of short weights. Over the next 2 decades, his company, the Toledo Computing Scale Company, pursued an innovative advertising and marketing campaign that would turn the attempt of bureaucrats to increase their power into a mass consumer movement. Here you see a wagon with a pile of scales replaced by Toledo's products. The sign demands honest weight. Let's see what else went on. Late in 1911, Detroit had 2 scale companies of its own when enterprising Toledo salesmen came up with a bright idea to turn the installation of the Toledo scale into an honest weight opening. With discount prices, food fairs, festive decorations, live music and free cigars for the men and ice cream and carnations for the ladies. They would be on hand to explain the advantages of the new scale. 3,000 people turned out for an honest weight demonstration in the small town of Candleville, Indiana. 15,000 showed up for one in Buffalo. 50,000 thronged to the Ford's Market in Detroit. According to my research, it was the Ford Market Creamery on Woodward and LaBelle, opposite from the Ford Highland Park plant. In 1915, we had a national conference in Detroit, and the mayor asked, "Be honest at inspection." And this was difficult because a quarter of all the scales tested had been inaccurate. And the inspector from New York asked, "Sell by weight, otherwise look what you get, this measly chicken." And the president of the Housewife League in Detroit pleaded, "Teach us so we can detect fraud." And all this had a happy ending because state and federal laws had been implemented in Michigan, the Act 168 in 1913.
And so I said earlier on that this whole era, 1900, 1910, was very busy. So we talked a little bit about the company, the Stimpson companies and so on, and the competition being in Toledo. And here's the evidence that things were going international. This scale happens to have Stimpson patents. My patent's on it. It's actually a Dayton scale made by Poulet over in England. So all of this stuff was going at. So what you can see is that this area right here dominated the world market in computing scales. When we formed the trust, we had 50% of the market. Just with the two companies going together. This is a world-dominated market, and when you add Toledo to it, there's quite a bit there. And so, what did I do then in all this meantime? Well, remember I was down in Milan, and so then I moved from Milan in 1906 up to Northville and formed yet another Stimpson company, the Stimpson Scale and Manufacturing Company here. And you can see at that time, they had little postcards that people would send pictures of, like businesses, like my business, to say they were there, and the rail line that came by right out in front of the plant there. And so here's back to my family tree. Well, George was the one, my brother George was the one who really was mostly operating the plant in Northville, and he lived there, and he had 5 sons. Now, anytime you have 5 sons and they're all in the same little town, it becomes a big deal. And the little newspaper that's there, the record, oh wow, they pick up that, Aunt May came to visit, or whatever that may be. And so these 5 nephews of mine were in the news all the time. And Frederick, well, he had 3 kids, and one of them was named Flav, a little unusual name. So we're still looking for, well, Irene had read the name in a book somewhere around, 1900. So does anybody know where that name ever came from? It's in a book. Read your old books. It's somewhere out there. And then Flav had a son. Of course, he had named him Flav also, but that son hated his name, so when he went to kindergarten, he said, "My name is Tim." And everybody knew him as Tim, I think, until he died, except for he had one patent, that Flav on it there. And then Stanley had, well, this whole family here. And why do we make a remark about that whole family? Well, Rich, Jim, and Fred all happen to live around here. And in fact, just last weekend, we saw 2 of them. So the Stimpson line lives on. And they now have one of them is a member of our organization and all that other kind of good stuff. So this family in Northville, you start reading the headlines, and my father, William, was stricken, and he was out hunting, and he was out there with his grandkids, and Reed and Jay helped him out, so that was really good. But he didn't do very well after that. It was really fairly bad. Riley, Earl, was a professional baseball player out in Massachusetts, so we were really all proud of that. And Reed went out to the war, and there was this big welcoming party when he came back. And in the meantime, remember, I had these partners, and we bought and sold companies and all this kind of stuff, so life was really pretty good. And somebody said, well, Estelle and I, well, we never had any kids, but we had this beautiful suite down here in Detroit in Hotel Plaza. That was really kind of nice. And so while we're doing all of this is another kind of scale we made. This one, it's called a pitless scale, and I have a patent for a pitless scale, because to weigh a wagon, they used to have to dig pits and then put all this mechanism in there so that, you know, the horse could get up over and so it couldn't have too high up. So if you had a design that would just really reduce that, then you didn't have much of a hill to get up. So it was really important to have that. And in fact, here's one at the Minden elevator, and it's a house scale, but there's this arrow about William, what's that arrow pointing there?
Bryansky.
Who's that?
Bryansky, my grandfather.
Oh, that's your grandfather. That's surely well, good. I'm glad somebody can pronounce that. Thank you. And besides that, we were also, you know, we're in there visiting grocery stores and so on, so we expanded into other machines that grocery stores were using. And they were using coffee grinders and meat slicers and those kinds of things. Eventually they put electric motors on them. And so that became the business. We expanded into all lines of different kinds of grocery business. So, quick summary. I was born in 1870. In fact, what is today? 21st? I got a birthday in 2 days. I'll be 141.
Yeah.
See, I even carry around a picture of me to know who I am, right? So that's what I do. And so I had my first patent, and we have the Stimpson ways. The Stimpson companies were in Michigan all the way across from 94 all the way up to 1926, which was in Northville. In the meantime, you have the Dayton company come up, and we formed together the Trust, the Computing Scale Company of America, and then the Stimpson Computing Scale Company. We changed names. Now, they were getting rid of my patents, okay? Which sounds familiar, doesn't it? And they got rid of my name, and they simply, if you found a Stimpson Model 70, the next year you would find a Detroit Automatic Scale number 70, exact same thing. So, what did I do? Well, they gave up my name, they gave up my patents, so, well, I went down to Louisville, Kentucky, and formed the Stimpson Computing Scale Company, okay? And in fact, you can see by the dates here that it was actually the longest lasting company and very successful down in Louisville. Had to wait till after the World War so we could get some financing, right? And Louisville was just loved to have us down there. We were a big deal in Louisville. So, you know, that was really important there and did well in the scale business. So this goes back to the Detroit Automatic. See, they were still making my original scale. Right there. One of the reasons is, not only was it easy to use, it would have a capacity up to 100 pounds. Other things that were around at that time couldn't match that. But you can see all this stuff is starting to come together. There's Detroit and Dayton scale, same patents underneath them. Beautiful little scales that they made. So those are samples of scales from Detroit Automatic. And then came an ad called the Automatic Way. Part of that related right back into the war effort. Remember, this is the war. And so automatic things were really important at that time. And you can see that we just tacked onto that. And then there was a scale company in Vermont, the first major scale company in the country, called Fairbanks. And they needed to get into this market. So what did I do? I sold them my patents to make my scale. So you can find a Fairbanks scale with this big sign on it that says Stimpson patents on it. Brings us to another question then. By 1920, right, which region dominated the world? Was it Detroit, Toledo, Dayton? Was it maybe New York, Boston, Philadelphia with all their companies? Was it international with London, Berlin, Paris? What's your choice?
Yay.
Hey, yeah, it was right out of here. This is where everything was.
That's me again, Mr. Where am I? Mr. Okay.
Are you
I'm asking you. I thought you would know. Okay. You know, this is on the right side, the scale was still 100 years later in business. Imagine. And the left one has a cozy job in the archives of the Detroit Historical Museum. No wonder that she looks so pretty. We had to have fierce ads. Lawsuits dismissed, patents protect everything, and Dayton far behind time. Let's hear a customer voice. I beg to state, I have used several different makes. I can safely say that the standard far surpasses them all is surely what you call gem of the world in weighing devices. Yes, I made the Rolls-Royce of scales. And the demand was this large, so in 1927 I built a new plant for $5.8 million today's money. And this is Jim, my inspector. He certifies the scales before they go out to the customer. And he told me the secret initiation into the Sealer Club. And so he taught me to take a 50-pound weight from the floor and throw it over my shoulder. You know, I had a few bruises before I learned it. Here's my wife Josephine buys our sausages here. And Frank even has 2 of my scales. They look pretty on the counter. And if you wonder what happened to the company, the big shark came and swallowed them all. And now Standard is in scale heaven with 2 renowned English companies. We heard several times the name Barnes. He came late into the business making his own scales. On the right you see Windsor even appearing as a manufacturing facility. The company was run by a tight-knit family. Everyone had the name Barnes. And Burton reports that the company started with 3 or 4 men, and meanwhile they make large scales in South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia, and Canada. Now we are in World War II times. What was the nickname of Detroit in those days? Arsenal of Democracy, because everyone made war products. So was Barnes, and we had been lucky enough to find an original soundtrack from an interview which was made to instill trust into the government after the loss in Pearl Harbor. And that's what it's all about, milling.
Mr. President, I'm Bill O'Melia. Right now we're in the plant of the Barnes Products Incorporated in Detroit. We're a small outfit compared with many plants around here, but we want you to know we're behind you 100% and that we're all out for this job of winning the war. The Barnes family has been making computing scales for about 50 years. You'll find their scales all over the world, and good scales too, because I helped to make them. Now we're feeding parts into the big plants of Detroit so that they can do the job that you want done. Our plant switched over to defense work, and us fellas who have made scales most of our lives are now doing something different. Curly Holzapple over there has been a scale painter for 45 years. Now he's operating a milling machine and doing a good job of it too. I sealed scales for around 20 years, and I'm running a screw machine now, and the boss says I'm doing fine. I suppose there are hundreds of thousands of fellas like me and thousands of small plants like the Barnes Products that have swung over 100% to winning the war. The big plants get their names in the papers, but believe me, us little fellas are doing an important job too. Well, I've got to get back to work now. Just want you to know we'll see you through.
It's heart-wrenching, isn't it?
So here's the next question. Who made this scale? In case you weren't watching, of course.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah.
Was it me? Was it Barnes, Mel Barnes and family? Was it Standard? Or was it this thing called IBM? Yeah. International Business Machine. They had a division called the Dayton Scale Company. And in fact, let's go backwards in time a little bit at this thing, because we might know it or heard of it as IBM, but in 1924, it was actually called CTR, and they changed the name to IBM. And CTR actually stood for, the C was for computing scales, came out of the computing scale company, that trust. Okay? That's where that C came from. The T came from a tabulating company, and the R came from a recording company. So the trust was 1/3 of this, and of course, part of that trust was Right here out of Detroit, out of the Stimpson company.
All right.
So it was formed in 1911 by those three. And then we get into some other scales that were around the state.
You know, that's the last item in food equipment. You see Patricia Gutzwiller sorting eggs, small, medium, large eggs. The idea came from Royal Oak, just a few steps away. And it was made in Quebec by the family. In our last presentation, we had Shirley with us. And Shirley remembered how she packages those little weights down at the bottom into brown bags. The furniture industry had their own requirements and needs. In order to sharpen planer blades, you had to use this scale to balance them. And if you made veneer, you needed to know the moisture, because otherwise the wood cracked during or after production. And then we even made this cute little postal scale. Unfortunately, I have to say goodbye and thank you, but you are in good hands for the rest.
So this is just a quick review of the major scale companies that existed in this state and for that period of time. Pretty impressive list. So we want to thank you all, but also we need to thank the major actors and players in this history. We have all of our inventors, we have those people who invested all of their money to do this, and we even had the lawyers that played a significant role because they were suing each other all the time. And of course, and of course we have our special guest tonight, including, and let us not forget, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you.